Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Hi, Ryan.
What's going on?
Today, this is the first episode we are officially doing a two-parter.
In advance, because you sometimes surprise people with that second two-parter, you know.
You're talking about the Mark Adams bonus material.
Hey, I did a 4-hour interview. I've got more material for you, you know.
Listen, I can't help it if I'm a great interviewer. All right, today is part 1 of 2, and the theme is Obscure Museums of London.
The Hidden Museums of London.
No, they're not hidden. They're obscure. You can find, actually, some of them are hard to find, but most of them you will be able to find fairly easily.
Okay, so they're not like, it's not like you have to go behind a special wall or something. These are, you can Google them and find them.
There is one where you have to go down below a floor. So you know, they are obscure. They're not, what I'm trying to say is they're not the British Museum. They're not the Victoria and Albert Museum. Those are the kind of blockbusters. These are the ones that really need your love, need your dollars. Well, need your pounds, I should say.
Yeah, or need your euros.
No. They never got on the euro.
I know.
Yeah, so, I don't even know what you're saying there.
It's a real currency, it's gonna, that's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, listen, I'm anxious to get to the Obscure Museums of London. We're going to cover 6 today. I got 7 for next time. I will say I had to delete one because it no longer does tours. I'm sad to say.
Now that is an obscure museum.
It was so obscure that they just had to close down. But maybe I'll just give you a little teaser about that at the end. But listen, first, we got to talk about an update on the quest for Rick Steves.
The quest for Rick Steves?
Now, Ryan, you recall, we started this podcast. We had a quest. We had something we were working towards.
Right.
We needed a perfect tagline.
And we found it.
We found, exactly. Week by week, we worked at it. We prepared. We brainstormed. We got there over many weeks.
We accepted feedback.
Yeah, I ignored a lot more feedback
but we
than
accepted
I accepted.
it.
But yeah. And today we now have a quest for Rick Steves. This is to get the travel writer Rick Steves, PBS personality, man about town.
We've interviewed him before, right? We did an episode where we had him on.
No. That what you're thinking of is an episode where I put Rick Steves in the title, but it was just a
that
love.
was just you.
It was just a love letter to Rick Steves.
Right.
It was just me trying to, prime the pump, if you will.
Okay, I got you.
I'm a Keynesian. Yeah. So we primed the pump with the love letter. We launched the quest for Rick Steves. Now I've got an important update.
He's coming on the show?
What? No. No, the quest is not over yet. I mean, what would a quest be if it didn't take twists and turns? We're going to take 1 step forward, 2 steps back sometimes. That's the nature of a quest.
I believe that. That I believe.
Well, listen, I believe today qualifies as 1 step forward. This Justin. Now, do you know the Boston Pops? Have you ever heard of the Boston Pops?
I have PBS, so yeah, I've heard of the Boston Pops.
They're most famous for their 4th of July extravaganza. They play some great patriotic music while fireworks explode over Boston. They've got a number of holiday CDs that are very enjoyable.
You're really selling them.
Very
4th
good.
of July is a holiday, by the way.
Good.
So they appear on many holidays.
And you can still get that CD.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Rick Steves has a program here in Boston on June 13th, Thursday, June 13th. It's called The Journey with Rick Steves. And are you ready? I'm going to read to you straight from the press release. America's leading authority on European travel. I mean, we know who that is, right? This is Rick Steves. I couldn't have written that better myself.
Yeah, there's no need to even name him.
Exactly. We all know. Hashtag America's leading authority on European travel. As he and the Boston Pops transport you on a musical voyage. Mr. Steves' extensive knowledge of European history and culture set the context for each piece as the orchestra performs a selection of stirring 19th century anthems by Romantic era composers. Each selection honors a particular nation, while the finale, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, Europe's official anthem, pays homage to the continent's motto of United in Diversity. The concert is enhanced by a montage of evocative video images curated by none other than Rick Steves.
It is. I am so glad that the Boston Pops are finally getting around to playing music from European composers. All these years of these ignored composers, they're gonna we're gonna hear some Mozart, we're gonna hear some Beethoven. It's gonna be we're really gonna celebrate that diversity.
I mean, has Rick Steves ever been riding more high? He's got the guidebook. I mean, this guy's been around since the 1970s. Yeah. Suddenly, he's in New York Times profiles. He's getting called. I mean, I don't even really know what he does on this. Like, he picked the music, I think.
I think we're just watching basically a slideshow of his vacation for 2.5 hours to like a generic European.
No, I think this is going to be stirring, and I can think of no one better to lead you through a European journey than Rick Steves. I'm very torn as to whether I should go to this or not because
he should swing by the old pod studio and do the show right then.
This is what I'm thinking, but his PR people told me he's busy until December, but maybe they didn't know that I live very convenient to the Boston Pops.
Yeah, you have season subscription to the Pops, I imagine, right?
No, I don't have a season subscription to the Pops. I've gone once to the Christmas Spectacular. One time they had a great reading of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. It was very moving. But are the Rockettes in Boston, are they sort of like Irish step dancers? That's the Christmas Spectacular. Yeah. What do they call it? I don't know. I went to a Christmas concert.
It's a Christmas pretty good.
Yeah, sure. And but I think that if Rick Steves had been there, it could have just been all the brighter. And I kind of feel like if I go, I'm saying like it's okay that he came to Boston without engaging with me, So I've really got some things to think about. I will say I sent the love letter episode to the PR folks, and so I think that this is good reason for a follow up.
And he didn't follow with a cease and desist, so I feel like things are still
again. As I always say, one step forward, no cease and desist. That's every day we go without a cease and desist is another step forward. So we'll take some hits back. So hopefully, maybe I'm going to get a guest seat at this. I'm expecting that I probably will. So Journey with Rick Steves, the Boston Pops, Thursday, June 13th. That's your update. And one step closer to getting him here in Beantown. And I feel one step closer to getting him right here in the podcast.
Well, I think while you stew on if you're going to go stalk Rick Steves at his dressing room door.
It mentioned that the continent's motto is united in diversity. What do you think the British are going to feel about that?
Are the British European still? I thought they were like,
they
opted out.
They're 1 foot in still.
Yeah.
They've got a little bit of time.
It could be, it's a TBD if there's any kind of situation.
Well, do you think post-Brexit they're going to need to change united in diversity? I guess England wasn't really a ton of diversity.
It wasn't like England was bringing the diversity,
I don't know. They had quite the empire. That's a lot of diversity.
Right-handed soccer players and left-handed soccer players. That's the diversity that Britain has.
Weak tea drinkers and strong tea drinkers. All right. Well, Ryan, I'm excited. I think, no one more diverse than Rick Steves to lead that United in Diversity concert.
Well, Kiernan, do you think it's time to take off?
I think it's absolutely time to take off. We got to get to London.
Let's get to London. Cabin crew, let's take off.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. Today, part one of a two-part series, Obscure Museums of London. Now, Ryan, I lived for a year in jolly old London.
You've never let me forget it in any conversation we've ever had.
Fantastic. Yeah. One of my proudest years. And then with work, I used to go back 2-3 weeks a year for about 4 or 5 years there. So very familiar with the Great Wen, as nobody calls it, but it used to be called because Wen means like an open wound. So, that was like when there was sewage on the streets and such. And one of the things that I love about London is the proliferation of wonderful museums that they have there. Because, I'm a real sucker for museums that are a bit off the beaten track.
Yeah, and London is a very old city. It's got a rich history. So, just because there's not a whole lot happening there now doesn't mean that, before there was an astonishing amount of stuff.
My wife, Catherine, fundamentally doesn't understand your character on the podcast because it's like you think nowhere outside of Bushwick matters. And it's like you forget this is a travel podcast. We love traveling to all of these places.
I also love London, and I just like to tease London a bit because as a New Yorker, it's sort of our like frenemy city.
Well, I thought that was Boston.
Boston thinks that we're frenemies, but New York doesn't. New York doesn't even have
So what you're
Boston's
saying-
number programmed in their phone.
So what you're saying is we're friends. All right. Boston and New York are friends. London and New York frenemies. Glad we got to the bottom of that. Ryan, you're talking that London goes back a long way. You're
Yes.
absolutely right about that. And that gets to my first pick, the number one obscure museum of London. This is the London Roman Amphitheater.
London had a Roman amphitheater?
That's exactly right. So now, Ryan, did you know that London was at one point part of the Roman Empire?
I did, loosely. I knew that, yeah.
Yeah, because what most people know from Bath, I think. Bath, England, they know if you go there, you see Roman baths, and that's where it takes its name from, and that's the great museum there. And surely we'll talk about that on a future episode. But what's important is that London was the largest, greatest city of Roman Britain.
And what period is this, that it is the largest greatest city of Roman Britain?
Well, it began in 47 AD,
Okay.
and it grew over time to be quite a major trading hub for all the reasons you'd expect. You know, it's got easy access to the ocean through the Thames. It's close enough to the continent to be able to bring things over, it's a maritime nation. And London actually became quite a thriving city, one of the most significant Roman cities outside of the Mediterranean region. And, as most major Roman cities had to have, they had a big amphitheater. And this is where you would get, your wild animal fights. So maybe throw some bears in there, some lions, go crazy. You'd get your public executions. I imagine at some points maybe the Christians were in there.
Did they have a production of Phantom of the Opera that played in there? Or is this pre-Andrew Lloyd Webber?
You know
London?
what? They didn't have a roof, so I think the chandelier drop would have been. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to. Should I spoiler alert for that? Spoiler alert. No chandelier drop in the Roman amphitheater. I like to think that a production of Oliver, I think, would be great in the round.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it would be fantastic. Or cats. They could just run all around you in a circle.
I don't encourage a production of cats in any theater.
It's true.
So you got the wild animal fights, the executions, and of course the gladiator fights. And these were popular entertainments for the hoi polloi. And what's amazing is bits of this Roman London, which by the way, it was called in the time Londinium, which I think is a wonderful fact. You could take that to your
fantastic.
favorite British friends and tell them, I'm going to visit Londinium. And they will say, what are you talking about? And then you can explain all about how it used to be a Roman city. And there are bits and pieces around London. You can still see bits of the Roman city wall. You can actually go below some modern buildings and still see pieces of that. And but as you'd expect in all these ruins, they're all a bit below ground level. And that's true also of this Roman amphitheater. And there's a full museum where you can go in and you can see the outline of where the amphitheater was, and they still have the stone entrance gate, the east gate, and the arena walls.
So is this in the area close to where, the West End, where the theater district is now in London, or a totally different location?
So this is more in the historic area. It's called the City of London, which is the more traditional older area. So if you go towards where the Tower of London is, St. Paul's, it's in that area. And it's particularly in a place called Guildhall Yard. And this is where many of the trade guilds used to have their corporations and houses there. And they actually have above ground a plaza where they've outlined in black brick exactly where the Roman amphitheater used to stand. And then you can go into the museum, which is below that, where you can see the ruins themselves.
So there are actually surviving ruins. It's not just a basement, that museum of what was the ruins.
There are some ruins there, though. I mean, it's not like, you're not walking into the Colosseum.
Yeah, no, I'm like, I would have known if there was a Colosseum in London. That would have been.
What I like about when I think of these amphitheaters is, they're very bloody. A lot of bloody stuff. You got the executions, the gladiator fights. And I found this great quote from St. Augustine. I can't resist bringing in a saint's quote if I find one. And he was talking about the power of when you get into these bloodthirsty crowds. This is what he said. He opened his eyes, feeling perfectly prepared to treat whatever he might see with scorn. He's talking about what he'd see in an amphitheater. He saw the blood and he gulped down the savagery. He was no longer the man who had come there, but was one of the crowd to which he had come. So you think you're going to go in and be sort of the good sport, not wanting to see all the blood, but you can't resist it. I know when I was there, I was ready to see something just ripped piece for piece.
He could have been describing a Trump rally, and
yeah, absolutely.
That was what jumped in my head when you were reading that quote.
Yeah, I think I like to think that the Romans were a little more civilized than that.
It's true. It's true. They read more. So
Exactly. Now, Ryan, moving on to the second pick for obscure museums of London, I believe you've actually been to this one, right?
I have. The last time I was in London last year, I asked you for some obscure recommendations, and this was your number one recommendation to me.
So this is a museum called Sir John Soane's Museum. Sir John Soane was a 19th century architect and collector of antiquities and art. And basically, over his lifetime, he bought up 3 houses, he demolished them, and he built this one big, beautiful, palatial mansion in which he could house his collection and his personal home.
Yeah, he filled this mansion with an incredible, eclectic, weird amount of stuff.
Yeah, like if I had to compare it to museums in the U.S., I would say it is most like the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum here in Boston, or in Philadelphia, the Barnes Collection, which were both great collectors who had very specific ways that they wanted to see the art preserved and presented in their homes.
Yeah, and it's sort of like if you walked into one of the Koch brothers like townhouses on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, though John Soane made it. I mean, don't drag his name through the mud. Sure, he was a rich man, but he was an architect. I mean, this man built things. He wasn't like just making paper towels.
No, he had an appreciation for all the things that he purchased and has displayed for the world.
Well, yeah,
so,
he was good
yeah.
he was good at stealing antiquities. So inside is a crazy array. I mean, you can speak to it too, of antiquities, sculpture, furniture, paintings, and paintings by masters that you would recognize: Canaletto, Turner, Hogarth.
And actually, speaking of hidden, there's a sort of secret door upstairs that the docent has to actually open for you, so you can actually see these additional paintings that are sort of hidden inside this little secret compartment. So, hidden was a fair way to describe this museum.
And it all okay, again, we're calling it obscure, not hidden. But that really gets to the heart of this museum, like many of these types of museums. It's kind of like a fun house, right? Like you feel like you're entering into the mind of John Soane. And there are things to discover around every corner. I remember particularly he has a big Egyptian sarcophagus that was an Egyptian king. Thousands of architectural drawings. And I actually went on a night that is even more special. So if you're in London, you should check out if this is available. They do what they call Soane Lights, which are candlelight tours. So you can go through the house, very atmospherically lit, and it just brings a whole new dimension of kind of wandering through these great works of art.
The day that I went, it was pouring down rain, and it was pretty much just me and this one other couple that had were in the entire house. But they did make you check all of your bags and your phone and everything. So you can't take any
No
cool
photos.
Instagrams, no photos. No. I had to actually buy a few postcards just to
Take photos of the postcards.
just to take photos of the postcards. But it would be interesting to walk around in candlelight because it's already sort of an eerie. I mean, it's not like a bright museum. It has the feel of a house that's been around for a while.
Totally. And to your point about that, you feel like it's an escape from the city of London because it's also on a very quiet square called Lincoln's Inn Fields. And it's just steps from major areas, but it feels very secluded and quiet. So it does feel more than anything. And the fact that you're saying they take your phones away now, like you're stepping back into the 19th century.
Yeah, definitely. You actually can engage with the art without having to look at it through your phone, which is nice.
I do think you have, two kind of types of museums. One museum that really wants to categorize, that wants to describe and educate, and another that really just wants you to experience what is there. This is solidly in that second experience category. And so it's not overly labeled. It's not. There's not sort of a chronological flow. It's kind of a curio cabinet, which I think makes it all the more fun to wander around.
Yeah, I totally agree. You can be looking at a room full of small sort of British paintings, and then you're standing in front of a Roman sculpture. So it is really all over the map, and you kind of get to know sort of how interesting this guy was too, because everyone around you who works at the museum is ready to engage about his life.
Deeply devoted, yeah.
Yeah, totally devoted. Absolutely, this is like they are experts about these 14 rooms in London.
So that's the Sir John Soane Museum, the number 2 pick. Now, number 3 on the obscure museums of London. See, you got me saying hidden. It's just not right. These are obscure. They're not hidden. This is the Clockmakers Museum. Okay. Now, I'm a real sucker for people who are deeply passionate about one area, about one hobby, and devote themselves to it. And this is certainly true of what is called the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers. The Clockmakers were formed. It's a royal chartered guild. It's actually the 61st in the order of precedence of the 110 City of London livery companies. That's something we can go to in another time. A lot of them have places that you can visit to learn about their craft. And this one, though, they have stuck around, and there are what they call freemen and liverymen of the Clockmakers Company. And they still, to this day, are involved in what is called horology. Ryan, I can see that you want to make a tasteless joke. Horology is, of course, the study of clocks and watch making. Okay, keep it. This is a family show.
So, like Apple, they practice horology.
Well, it's not exactly that type of clock. We're talking about the more traditional. We're talking cogs and springs,
right,
and balance and wheels. They've got all types of timekeeping equipment. So they've got over 600 English and European watches, 30 clocks, 15 marine timekeepers. And actually, the marine timekeepers are sort of the treasure of this collection.
And those are timekeepers, I imagine, for a boat.
That's right. In the 1600s and the 1700s, think about what the British are doing, right? They're going all over the world with their navy, and they are building out the colony. And one of the greatest challenges they had was keeping a time standard on a boat, because you're crossing across all sorts of different time zones, and you're trying to figure out your latitude, your longitude. And so there was a challenge put out by the British government in 1714. It was called the Longitude Prize.
And this was to create a more accurate marine watch?
So it was to build a device that said, we're trying to create a clock that could help us determine longitude at sea. So at the time, it was easy to determine latitude. You basically used the placement of the sun and tables that showed you, that related it to the position of the ship. But longitude was a lot harder, because ocean navigators needed to know things like where it was headed, the speed they were going at a given time. So they needed what would come to be called a marine chronometer, which would allow them to know the exact time of the fixed location where they were. And from that, they could determine their longitude. Now, if you ask me anything beyond that description, the answer is I don't know, okay?
Right.
It was easy to get latitude. It was hard to get longitude. I mean, I think if you or I were thrown on one of these ships, we're probably being thrown right off the ship, frankly.
Well, I would just look down at my compass. I would look up at the sun. I'd say, no, it's 1:45. It doesn't seem that difficult.
Well, I'm not sure they called them compasses, but, fair enough. So in 1714, the British government created a reward, 10 to 20,000 pounds, for anybody who could come up with one of these marine chronometers.
This is like the world's first X Prize.
That's exactly right. This is the original X Prize.
Yeah.
I wish governments would do more of this.
Yeah, I love X Prizes.
And there was a Yorkshire carpenter whose name was John Harrison, and he's the one who cracked the code. He figured out how to make a timepiece that could be used at sea. It went through versions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in each one, he was kind of tweaking. I mean, really, it was the original lean startup. He was tweaking little changes here and there. He figured out where the centrifugal force might be playing with it, where the roller bearings were getting at it. Because think about it. You have to create a physical device that is not affected by the rocking and swaying of a ship.
How was he simulating that, I wonder? Can you imagine? I'm this is a serious question.
I assume, if this workshop's a rocking, don't come a knocking, because I'm trying to figure out if my chronometer can stay on time. And this is sort of the prized possession of the Clockmakers Museum. They have a John Harrison H5 chronometer, and you can go up and you can tap the glass, and you could pretend that you're, a hardy seaman and that you're heading out to conquer the world.
So, my favorite exhibit, I think, and I haven't been, but this is high on my list now after your this thrilling story you just told us all. It's called Horological the cabinet of horological curiosities,
Sure. Yeah.
where all the weirdest examples of timepieces are kept.
Well, Ryan, it's exactly those sort of crazy, fun, interesting clock types, watch types that you can find if you go to the Clockmakers Museum. I spent a lovely afternoon there. And, I got to say, I'm not a person who's particularly interested in clockmaking, but
You wouldn't know it.
Okay. But I am obsessed with people who love clockmaking. And by the time I walked out, I got to tell you, I really did want a watch and probably a marine chronometer too.
Yeah, I think that would. I actually think that something out of the curiosities cabinet would better suit you, Kiernan.
I think so too.
You're a curiosity.
I am a bit of a curiosity. And I will just one last note. This museum was originally at the Guild Hall, which is where I saw it. But it has since moved. In 2015, it moved to the Science Museum. So you'll actually be able to see more displays than just the Clockmakers Museum as well.
That's good, because sometimes people like a little more than clocks in their museum visits.
Well. Just wait until we get to the Windmill Museum.
He's not kidding, folks.
Just a couple of minutes, folks. All right. Well, we're winding the bend here. The fourth pick for an obscure museum of London. It's the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, and Petrie is Petrie.
So not like Petri, like a Petri dish.
Well, it's like a Petri dish with an E on the end.
When I first saw this on the list that you gave me, I thought this was some sort of a museum of viruses, just a bunch of petri dishes sitting around.
Actually,
here's the Black Plague.
There is a medical marvels museum that's going to be on the next two-parter.
Oh my gosh!
And the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology is a University of College London museum. The next two actually are, and they have over 80,000 pieces of Egyptian art and household items. Super fascinating stuff. And what I like about this is I think that often you see Egyptian antiquities in the context of a much larger museum that tries to cover, lots of different nations. This one is solely devoted to Egyptian antiquities. So they go really deep and they have lots of interesting, fun stuff.
What is one example of something that you were sort of surprised to see in an Egyptian household?
So one piece that I had seen versions of, but some of the best are here, are when Egypt was part of the Roman Empire, the way that they buried people actually changed. And you would have a sarcophagus, but instead of those sort of, King Tut golden masks that we think of, they started doing really realistic funerary portraits of the person that was buried. And you look at these portraits, and this looks like somebody that you could work in a cubicle next to. I mean, they're so lifelike and realistic and naturalistic that it's quite jarring when you're walking through, stone god sculptures and paintings of the Book of the Dead, and then you're sort of faced with somebody who you probably just, drank a pint next to at the pub.
Yeah, I'm laughing at the idea of sitting in my cubicle next to the Egyptian god Ra.
Well, you got Ra and Ryan. They went in alphabetical order when assigning cubicles.
Yeah.
But they also have some very interesting papyri. I personally don't read Egyptian hieroglyphics, but from what I'm told,
Mayor Pete does. Mayor Pete is fluent in Egyptian hieroglyphics.
That guy does everything. Absolutely. I mean, he's running for pharaoh, and you know what? I'd be all right with it. They've got the only known veterinarian papyri from ancient Egypt, and they even have a medical papyri that covers gynecological issues.
Oh my gosh.
Wait,
veterinarians took notes back then?
Well, I mean, I think,
veterinarians barely take notes now. It's just like, that's a cat. Yep.
If I yank on the tail, does it yap? Yep. All right. He's good to go. So maybe we should translate these veterinarian papyri and bring them into today. And to think that they were even writing down medical treatises. I mean, that's not something that I typically think of when I think about Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Yeah, I'm sure that the medical science wasn't great though. So we should
I wouldn't be so sure, Ryan. And then there's another part that makes them feel touchingly close to modern, which is they have a lot of sort of common everyday objects that are grouped in such ways that you can really picture what these people's lives were like. So they have sandals and clothing and jewelry and combs, tweezers, mirrors, game pieces. And probably my favorite piece in the museum is they even have what they believe was a rat trap, a mouse trap in a house that was, something that all New Yorkers could definitely relate to.
Yeah, you just described a hipster's bedroom: sandals, combs, jewelry, tweezers, mirror, game pieces, and a rat trap.
Yeah, and maybe even a gynecological treatise. Hashtag future is female, right?
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
as it turns out, the past in ancient Egypt also female.
Also female. Cleopatra.
Yep, that's a woman from Egypt. So again, that's the Petri Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. This one, Ryan, to your point, actually is a little hidden. You have to go into a university building, kind of through this lane, up a stairwell, and you will often be the only one in this museum. And I'll tell you a fun way to see it. This is the way Catherine and I saw it. You can download a scavenger hunt that sort of takes you, challenges you to find kind of the best pieces in the museum. So you know what? I'll link to a good one in the show notes. If you've got a free Saturday night, it's no longer free, my friend. We're on to the 5th obscure museum of London, and this one, Ryan. I mean, if you thought Clockmakers was narrow, we're going real narrow here. This is the Wimbledon Windmill Museum. And listen, is
this connected to Wimbledon, the tennis match?
It's in that area. Yes, it's near Wimbledon Park, which is a lovely park. If you said,
what is more exciting than tennis, I would have jokingly said a windmill.
I don't know,
museum.
watching a windmill blow. Well, listen. Not only is this museum about windmills, it's inside a windmill. I mean, come on. This windmill was built in 1817. And then it was gutted and turned by devotees into a museum of windmill culture and history.
Devotees.
It talks all about the design and construction of British windmills, but it doesn't stop there. It covers the eras and designs of windmills from Persian and Greek straight through to the modern wind turbine. I mean, there's nowhere else, I believe, on Earth that you're going to learn more about windmills.
Do they address the fact that windmills cause cancer?
Okay. We are not propagating Fox News conspiracy theories on this. In fact, I think if anybody would have the scientific experience to say absolutely definitively and credibly, it would be the docents at the Wimbledon Windmill Museum, who, by the way, are all volunteers. That's right. They are all volunteers. People who love windmills so much they give of themselves and their own free time to show you around Windmill Museum and increase windmill awareness.
Windmill awareness. They are windbags for windmills.
Ryan. And they have wonderful little models that I love. I'm going to post some great videos to the Instagram. If there's ever been a reason to subscribe, I think it's for these windmill models. They actually work, and of course our Instagram handle at OOO podcast at OOO podcast, right?
At OOO podcast,
right? Like ooh podcast.
And are these models sort of like train scale, like the kind you would see in a Christmas train?
They're small models. I can tell you, this was years ago that I went to them, but one of the things I most remember fascinated me was that windmills used to be built on a rotary, and you could walk out of the house, the mill itself, pick up the back, and turn it anywhere in 360 degrees so that it would be facing against the wind, so that the windmill would actually be spinning. So
that's amazing.
Listen, it is exactly those sorts of amazing facts that you could learn at these obscure museums. And then, as if that weren't enough, it had just the cherry on the cake for Kiernan P. Schmidt, which is they also have a display devoted to the Scouts, the scouting movement, the Boy Scouts, because the founder of the Boy Scouts, Robert Baden-Powell, wrote the original handbook, Scouting for Boys, Scouting for Boys. Actually, Ryan, I think I've seen that handbook on your bookshelf. Scouting for Boys was written just feet away from this windmill at what they call the Mill House. So no better place to earn your windmill badge and learn more about the Boy Scouts. Of course, I was a proud Boy Scout. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I think all those adjectives describe me to an absolute T.
Definitely thrifty.
Thrifty for sure.
Yeah.
And reverent. I also am reverent. And
I was in 4-H, which was like the rural equivalent to the Boy Scouts.
That's like a Future Farmers of America sort of thing?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I've really become a farmer. I use a lot of my skills.
At some point, I would like to do a Boy Scout episode. And of course, that title no longer describes what it is. Girls are now allowed into the Scouts. So Baden-Powell's tradition going strong. So if you're a proud Scout or you enjoy a breeze, go to the Wimbledon Windmill Museum. Ryan, I got to say, it blew me away.
Oh, my God.
The final and maybe the best on the list, Ryan. It's
I don't think you can get better than the Windmill Museum. If there were any clocks in that Windmill Museum, it might be the perfect experience.
The final one here, it's another University College London museum, and it's called the Grant Museum of Zoology and Comparative Anatomy. So this is like a fun...
Grindr is sort of a place you go for comparative anatomy.
Ryan.
I know.
You're just talking about scouting for boys. And you're already going to Grindr. I mean, good God. Sorry, folks. Let's get back to the zoological. Well, I guess actually Grindr in its own way is a bit zoological as well. Ryan, what I love about this is that it is a scientific museum. It's more than what you're going to get from your typical natural history museum. The collection goes back hundreds of years. They have 68,000 zoological specimens in their collection. And the collection was used for scientific study for aspiring zoologists. So they have things like the Bisected Head Collection, where it's a bunch of animal heads that they've cut in half and preserved so that you can see the brain and the eyes and the teeth completely in profile.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they've been preserved so you can actually just see inside of them.
Exactly.
That's creepy.
And they even have a whole collection that is just the brain collection. So you can see brains from all different types of animals, all sizes, all different specialty areas. And it just has that sort of creepy feeling that you get for the non-scientist, I would say. I feel like you could really picture Victorian zoologists kind of pointing to the brain and saying, this is where the bat, echolocation is located.
This is where the soul is. You see it right there?
Yeah. This is where the soul is. And so they've got, I'll just go quickly say for you, the specimens that they've got fluid preserved. They've got pinned entomology. They've got taxidermy. They've got skeletons. They've even got freeze-dried. I mean, they've got everything for your zoological and comparative anatomy needs.
It seems like this museum could merge with the penis museum that Rick Steves told us. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like they could, that would really kind of build out their, collection of comparative anatomy.
Walking into this museum, you really you're immediately surrounded by bones and big glass jars and antlers. And it just is a very evocative experience. Again, kind of that curiosity cabinet feel about it. And one of the things that you can do, even if you're not going to London, but that's awfully fun, is that the entire catalog of specimens is completely online searchable. And they don't have pictures of everything, but you can have a great time just going in and seeing what kind of thing they have. So just for kicks, I went in and searched for platypus. And it came back with 7 pages of results of platypus specimens that they have. And it included skeleton, a preserved specimen of a whole platypus, 6 dissected and preserved hearts. They had preserved genitals and female cloaca. And don't worry, they do have a picture of that, folks. Some sick listener going, yes, finally. They've got a bisected skull, as promised, and assorted bones from the feet, along with 6 more pages of results.
It seems like if you are in the mood for platypus anatomy, there's no place that you should go in London besides the Grant Museum.
Absolutely. And, I typed in moose. What came back was that they have a cast of the complete upper tooth row of moose. They've also got dodo bones there. And one thing to keep your eye out for when you go to the Grant Museum, this has to be my favorite thing that they have. It's a giant glass jar completely stuffed with moles. The little creatures that go underneath the ground.
Oh, I was imagining like Cindy Crawford,
no.
like
Not Cindy
just a
Crawford
bunch
moles.
of beauty marks.
No. We're talking about underground blind moles who dig.
Yeah. Why would you have to put them in a jar?
Do you know, it is a huge mystery of the museum why they are preserved in this jar. And sometimes they'll do a guessing game of how many have been stuffed into this jar, because all you see are these like snoots and limbs pressed up against the glass. It's actually like really, it's for those who don't have a sick fascination with dead things, you may not find it as entertaining as I do. But sometimes they'll do a guess how many moles are in the jar game. And spoiler alert, if you don't want to know, turn it off. There are 18 moles in the jar.
Well, you could win that contest now.
And we will absolutely be posting a picture of the jar of moles to @OOO podcast.
We're going to lose some followers if you post that.
Oh, but think of all the quality followers we're going to gain.
I'm going to look for those hashtags, see what you, jar of moles. I just want to see what you come up with for inventive hashtags.
You will, you will immediately see this, I'm sure. So, Ryan, just to do the rundown one last time. So, part one of a 2-part series, Obscure Museums of London. Number 1, the London Roman Amphitheatre. Number 2, the Sir John Soane Museum. Number 3, the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers Museum. Number 4, the Petre Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. Number 5, the Wimbledon Windmill Museum, which also includes a special scouting bonus. And finally, number 6, the Grant Museum of Zoology and Comparative Anatomy, where you will see a jar stuffed with moles.
And well, Kieran, I feel like I've never even been to London. I have not been to the Windmill Museum. I've never
you
hung out with the clockmakers.
Spent all your time at Buckingham Palace and at Parliament, and meanwhile you've been walking right past a jar full of moles. You didn't even know it.
Yeah, no. So I will be checking out those moles next time, no doubt.
All right, and look forward to part 2 of London's Obscure Museums. But Ryan, for now, I think it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
Now, Ryan, the last stop is your favorite segment, my favorite segment. It's the People segment. That's really catching on. People like to call it the People segment. It's the last segment of the show where you and I each talk about one thing that we've read or tasted or thought about or smelled or experienced that week that kept the spirit of wanderlust alive, even during the workday trials of just getting through life. So, Ryan, how did you feed that spirit of travel this week? What is your last stop?
Well, in keeping in the spirit of museums in London, I actually got in the mail this week from the Imperial War Museum. My account has expired. My membership has expired.
Oh, no.
And the story of how I became a member of the Imperial War Museum was I went to London last year and I wanted to go see the Churchill War Rooms.
Yes, very popular museum.
Very popular museum.
Quite the opposite of the obscure.
Not obscure, but I'm still talking about it today because I had never been. And
I've always avoided that museum because it has mannequins, doesn't it? Mannequins somehow don't sound great to me.
They barely have mannequins. Very little mannequins.
Okay.
There's no reenactors. It's not like Williamsburg.
How many jars of moles do they have?
Churchill would begin every morning with a jar of moles. So,
like Jabba the Hutt in those frogs.
Few people knew. But I could not get into the Imperial War Museum because it was full for the day, and they have limited amount of people who can tour. It's a very small museum.
Quite popular.
But I noticed a line that said for members. So what I did was I went to a pub and I had a beer, and on my phone I bought a membership to the Imperial War Museum.
Smart.
And then I went back immediately and and the guy was like, you still can't come in. I go, actually, I'm a member now. And I held up my membership card.
Did he stand up a little straighter and straighten his tie and say, I'm so sorry, sir?
Well, I said, you think that Churchill would have let this membership line stop him, And so I was able to get in. And
how much more times the ticket price did you pay to get that?
It was only like 2 times the ticket price.
Okay.
It wasn't so bad.
Yeah, no, that's not bad. And it's especially good if members get to bring in a free visitor. Then you just split the cost.
I got to skip the line of all these people who had, gotten time tickets.
Absolutely.
Very American of me. And but the museum itself is fascinating. They've built out like a sort of a more family-friendly sort of historical look at Churchill and his entire career, and sort of a separate part of the museum.
Yeah.
But the actual war rooms are underground, and you can actually see where Churchill slept, see where he gave his famous radio addresses. You can see where people were strategizing his sort of senior leadership were strategizing the war. And it's really fascinating to imagine that these people sort of lived in a bunker that's sort of, right in downtown London. And were there for a very long time. And if there had been a well-placed bomb, they had reinforced the ceiling with pretty heavy concrete. But a well-placed bomb would have decimated the entire bunker. So they just never got it.
Well, that just leaves it to ask: are you going to renew your membership?
I did not renew my membership, but if I go back to the London, I will definitely make an appointment to see the war rooms this time.
I think you should buy a membership to the Wimbledon Windmill Museum next time. I think that usually those tickets sell out.
Yeah,
from
somehow
what I
Somehow I bet the clock museum will let me in day
There's
out.
walk-ins.
Yeah. What's your last stop this week, Kiernan?
So Ryan, this week I paid a visit down to New York. Met you for
Thanks. Oh, yeah.
No, we did see each other. Yeah. And I got to spend a little time with you. When I wasn't with you, I took in a great show at the Met Museum. Really museum-heavy episode here. And it's a great show called The World Between Empires. And even if you can't make it to the show itself, I recommend giving it a look online. Because it's an interesting show that focuses in on the area of land, the cultures that lived squeezed between the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire. And so it was basically between 100 BC and 250 AD, and it covers what would be modern day Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. And you get a real interesting mix. And what's fascinating about this hybrid of cultures is that you get art that was discovered in the same place from the same time that is of two completely different looks. So you might find a bust that's classical, beautiful, a depiction of a Roman god. And then right next to it is sort of a stone rectangle with two eyes and a nose and a mouth that look like they came out of a Mr. Potato Head set, kind of just glommed on. And these were worshipped and decorated the buildings right next to each other at exactly the same time. So it's interesting when you have such different styles that don't kind of meld into one, but live side by side.
Yeah, it was the sort of the Roman world around that time was full of incredibly mystic religions, and there were I've read a fantastic book called City of God, which was about how in these cities just there were incredible amount of religions that sort of battled for idea, and Jesus sort of became the incredibly popular in that period, but there was things like Mithra and other sort of gods that were kind of around the same time period.
Yeah, and there were many gods that I had never heard of that were native to this area. And oftentimes they were mixing and matching, Roman gods, Parthian gods to enter into their worship by different names with depictions that are very similar. So they had, for example, a series of statues that may depict Hercules, certainly looked like Hercules to me, but they can't definitively say this was definitely Hercules. It might have been a local adaptation.
It might have been He-Man. A lot of people
Right.
look like Hercules to me.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at one right now, Ryan J. Davis.
Thank you.
And but maybe the most interesting thing that they have there is wall paintings from what is believed to be the world's oldest surviving church. It's a Christian building at a town called Dura Europos. And it is believed to be the first depiction of Jesus ever.
Really?
And they have it in this show, and they show Jesus walking on water. They show him healing a paralytic, and sort of famous stories that even were in circulation then. And the thing that maybe scandalized me the most, Jesus didn't have a beard.
No beard?
No beard. Beardless Jesus.
Wow. So for all these years, I've been imagining that blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus with
Yeah.
that great beard. That wasn't him. He beardless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. Yeah, those blonde hair depictions of Jesus are always a stumper.
So Jesus would be better played by a young Zac Efron than, say, that guy Thor, Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, both of those highly Middle Eastern looking actors. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
If you can't make it, do look up this artwork. And they also have a wonderful display that I do hope that they make available online in time, where they have modern archaeologists and curators reflect on how ISIS has destroyed many of these areas in exactly this space, in this area today. And so I think famously, we all know Palmyra was
Right.
bombed and chipped away. What gives a little bit of hope I found in this exhibition is that lots of the antiquities do survive in museums. And while it was a huge loss to all of us when ISIS destroyed those ruins on the site, you can still get a taste of that culture. So some of it is still preserved.
Gosh, and we probably don't even have a full accounting of all the antiquity that's been lost in that conflict.
They've actually been using radar photographs to try to determine. And one of the videos of an archaeologist talking about it says, some people say, oh, isn't it so great they only destroyed 5%, it looks like. And he says, but that 5%, it is destroying a people that can never be found again.
Right.
And he had actually visited exactly the sites that they were destroying and spoke about it very movingly. So it's quite a wonderful exhibition. It runs through June 23rd. If you find yourself in New York and at the Met, definitely check it out.
That obscure museum, the Met, just a small little mom and pop shop, So what are we talking about next week, Kiernan?
Next week, we are having a great interview. It's actually an obscure museum of its own.
What?
Here in the United States, in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Museum, you know the system. It has tons of great museums.
D.C. is a great museum town.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest that I've ever visited, we're talking to the director of the National Postal Museum.
Oh my gosh, you've told me about it. You've talked about it here in the pod before.
There are more stories inside that museum than you would possibly imagine. I will have you convinced by the end of this interview that the story of the Postal Service is the story of America.
There are more stories in that museum that you could write on a postcard.
Brother.
Well, until next week, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken.
I'm still thinking about that tooth fairy rat.
Now you should be thinking about a jar of moles. If I can't displace it with a jar of moles, I don't think you're ever gonna forget it.
They had that rat trap probably to protect their teeth at night.
Oh,
they were onto it early.
Interesting theory.